Right. So we're on, and we're on with Torstein
Hello.
from Going South, and I don't think I've ever had you on my channel as an interviewee, although we've been in a group chat before, right?
Yeah, the infamous group chat.
The infamous group chat with Hugh, dumbass, and many people about bringing down the economic system through various means.
Yeah.
And I don't know. What was your takeaway from that chat? That was a while ago. It was a few months ago. So I don't,
I think it was interesting. It was all Lord Yu's suggestion and everything, and I was just his henchman or secretary or whatever. The funny thing is that only this Monday, with the new rebellion in London, Gail, Gail, XR Gail, she actually repeated that line of action to hold back debt payments and to crash the monetary system. She said that in a TV interview, actually. So it's not like it hasn't gotten some feet. So it might still happen, actually.
Right. I mean, it's still, to me, an interesting idea, a prong of action, I guess, if you will. But I kind of feel like it's going to have to be a whole bunch of things, at once. And I think we're already, everybody understands that we're teetering on some kind of economic recession or slowdown. We're on the brink of how bad it will be. I don't know, but
at least you can say, that the XR, Extinction Rebellion, and together with the school strikers, they've certainly got the numbers. So if they wanted to pull something like a debt strike or an economic strike, or a run on the banks or something, they would certainly have the masses to get the ball rolling.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting. Well, they haven't gone that route yet. But it would be interesting if they actually took up the cause of boycotting, of some massive, right now they're shutting down, business as usual, I guess, or trying to interrupt, stop traffic or interrupt business as usual on some level. But you could actually really interrupt business as usual if you, I mean, how many people took part? Yes, on Monday it was it 7 million or more than that? No, less.
I'm not sure, but the school strikers on the last Friday of September had like 7.5 million, but I haven't got the figures for the XR yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I saw with the XR one too. Was it was roughly,
all right, okay,
7 million people or something, and that's a good number of people.
Yeah.
If you could mobilize them to, it's tough though because they're spread out over the whole globe.
Yeah, but that could be an advantage, I guess. I don't know if you saw, but this this Just Have a Think guy on YouTube. Yes. He was just on, and I saw it the first thing in the morning. So I just sort of before I got my critical, skeptical face on, I saw his video, and it's an interesting thing. Together with what we just mentioned now, is that if we use his list of banks that bankroll fossil fuel extraction, and banks that don't, and we just make the first move to get people to move their accounts over to the other banks, that's the kind of thing that you could actually start a bigger movement. Have the first snowball effect on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely we could boycott banks. We could, with the Friday gas strike thing that I'm trying to do, and everybody remember to do that. I will, this Friday, do not buy gas. But if 7 million people didn't buy fuel, I don't imagine the strikers are out buying fuel, but you don't know. but if we could organize something that's even broader than that, like it's well documented that, say in apartheid South Africa, they had boycotts going on, and they weren't one day boycotts; they were week long or month long, or standing boycotts that actually really did a lot of financial damage.
Yeah.
Or you have the GM strikers right now.
Yeah.
Damaging the American. The GM, is losing $1 billion. Has already lost $1 billion.
Yeah.
That's a good hit. I mean that. So if you could get everybody to do just a general boycott of fossil fuels or whatever it might be, banks, just pull your money out, stop buying it, stop and stop giving the system energy.
Yeah, and it could let's say that every kid has a bank account, right? So let's say that all the cool climate kids and their friends just move their money to the other bank, and
right.
And that becomes a thing. And in the connection to that, you could do the same thing with candidates, for politics. But sadly today, like in Norway, there is not one single politician or political party that is totally against fossil fuels. So it's like you have to find that one single politician in every country.
Yeah, and the same goes for the U.S., right?
Yeah.
The Democrats and the Republicans are both, profiting and supporting fossil fuels.
Yeah.
It's only a certain faction of Democrats that are, against it or trying to do something about it. But it's a very small faction, and it's, they get shouted down pretty well.
Yeah, I heard on the BBC today that this XR guy, what's his name? But he was suggesting.
You're talking about the Dr. Rupert Reed?
Yeah, Rupert Reed. Yeah. So he was suggesting that could we at least stop making the problem worse, And that's interesting because what he was referring to was stop building new driveways of new parts of airports and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But actually just doing the exact same thing as we did last year is also making the problem worse because the concentration in the atmosphere is going up. So he was just talking about making it even more worse than we did last year, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I follow. I got his. So it's an interesting point that he made because he almost made it to the idea that we actually need to start dismantling our infrastructure, right? He just said, "Can we just stop?"
Yeah.
Because I think that they were saying, "Oh, everybody has to quit flying or quit driving," and he was like, "Well, let's not even do that. Let's just stop making it worse." I get what he was saying, but you actually do have to go beyond, because just status quo is not good. Status quo is
making it worse. Every day this civilization goes on, it gets worse, and we see that with the bees and the insects and the trees and forests dying and the numbers of animals going down. All the wild animals. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. We need to do. If we're talking about radical action. I mean, I get it. Just stop. Stop making it worse.
Just stop.
Right. Just stop. Building it. And I feel the same way though. Every time I pass a construction site anywhere, I'm just like, or if they're doing road construction, I'm just like, can just stop?
Yeah.
You need to just stop the advancement of civilization before you can even talk about retracting it, but it doesn't seem like anybody's,
That's kind of an interesting thing. I used to live with one foot in each world back in Norway, but after I moved to Greenland, it's kind of even more. What can I say? It's more institutionalized because the Greenland society is going its own way, and I don't look into what's happening here in politics and construction and stuff. And the other leg is like the climate collapse leg, because all of us are sort of walking in two worlds at the same time, and we choose our words when we talk to other people, and that's, I won't say it's harder up here. It's more like it's two more separate worlds, and you kind of and you need to keep those worlds separate anyway, inside yourself. Yeah. Because you can't just go out in the street screaming end of the world to everybody every day.
Yeah. I mean, because then you can't, it's hard to just do the daily things or interact with people on a normal basis. Whatever normal is, but no, I mean, totally. I'm doing the same here, and I've actually kind of stopped talking to people about climate change. Only very, very, very little, outside of the channel. So I don't really say much about it. So so everybody's just kind of drifting along, waiting for some, the hammer to drop, if you will, or whatever. But so I wanted to ask you if you were talking about the numbers, the biomass numbers,
it's kind of a larger issue, but the way that the larger society is framing this is that they give us the extent numbers every day from several sources, even, but the sea ice volume numbers we only get like 10 times a day, 10 times a year. Sorry.
Right.
So they come in large chunks, right? And and because they are published in that way, the daily news from that sort of sector, from that sort of niche, is all about the surface layer. How much surface ice is it? And it's the opposite of what we should be focusing on. And because how much sea ice is it? How much is the total chunks of ice, the total mass of ice, and the most worrying thing, I think, is that the UN made a cryosphere and ice and oceans report that came out in the last week of September, and I read, because my computer crashed and I had the report on my iPad. I was able to read the entire to browse through the entire report for the first 2-3 days of my crash, and so they do mention the word volume in one sentence among those 1,200 pages, but it's all about extent and surface area. Sure. And that one sentence has no numbers and no graphs associated to it. It's like they totally ignore the volume, and this is year 35 or something for the IPCC. It's not like they're amateurs just coming into the field with a toe in the water. They've been doing this for almost 40 years, and it's like they consciously ignore the volume, and they also ignore the annual average of the volume. If they talk about volume at all, it's only like 15th September, the daily volume for the 15th of September. So it's and I just found out through a guy called Frank Rotering, who was on Collapse Chronicles the other day, who's been looking even more into the IPCC and seeing what kind of fraud they are, because they were actually set up in the 80s. They were set up at a time when a lot of very concerned climate scientists came out with very let's say very apocalyptic or very worrying news and predictions for which way we're going in the climate collapse. And so the setup of the IPCC by the governments of the planet, all the governments of the planet, was actually a preventive measure for the establishment to shut up these guys, to shut up these these climate scientists who were saying we have to do something, we need to do something, right?
Yeah. So they're like, okay, well, we'll give you a nice glossy report every year,
yeah,
or whatever,
every 5 years actually,
or 5 years, however it is that,
yeah. So it's like you could say that the IPCC could change the name to nothing to see here, move along, right? That's sort of what they're doing, you know.
Right. I cannot see or something like that. I cannot see climate change.
Yeah.
I don't know. There'd be a good way to, like, you gotta play with the acronym there or something, but
yeah.
Interesting that, yeah, and there also seems to be, especially this year, a lack of awareness or talk about volume, sea ice volume, and except for that, you know, I think a few times this summer they were like, well, there's absolutely no ice in the Barents Sea.
Yeah.
You know, all the ice is gone from this whole channel or this entire area of the Arctic, and you know, nothing to see here exactly. Like there's no ice, so that just can't be a good thing. And I think the numbers that you posted them. I saw them posted some on Twitter, but basically it's the second lowest volume.
Yeah.
Beneath 2012, right?
Yeah, for the minimum, but of course we are still waiting for the entire year, for the average for the entire year. But that looks like it's going to be like second lowest for volume, I think, maybe second lowest or lowest ever for extent. Just back to the IPCC for a last little thing, because when they decided to set it up in 1986, then I was 15, the same year, same age as Greta Thunberg was when she started last year. And when the IPCC was officially started in 88, I was 17, and I was already, very, very eager climate activist back then in my school and in my organization back then. And the thing I'm hoping for Greta is that she won't be fooled by them the way I was fooled when I was a teenager, because I was a climate activist teenager, and I wanted this to be handled as soon as possible, of course.
Yes.
And then the IPCC came, and I kind of focused it on my schoolwork and and life in general.
Yeah, well, they're taking care of it. So
all governments of the world are taking care of it. Fine, it's off my back, right? And I was so wrong, and I can't express how disappointed I am that they turned out to be a fraud.
And wasn't it the same year that James Hansen made his speech?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So it was 88, I think.
Yeah.
And that. So I thought that it's a good thing that Extinction Rebellion is continuing to keep pressure on governments and keep this. They're saying, okay, well, in April, everybody declared a climate emergency, and they're like, but nothing's happened. That's all they did. So they're keeping the focus on, we're going to need some action. We're going to need something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. That's a positive, and that needs to just continue. The fact that the school strikes are every week, I think is a very strong.
It's very good. Yeah.
Showing in a strong message, because it's continuous. It doesn't, it's not Earth Day once a year. No. It's not, every couple of months or whatever. So, I mean, I think the combination of Extinction Rebellion and the school strikes, pressuring awareness and pressuring people to stay focused on the problem and the need for a solution, is paramount to, anything else. And that actually is what scares me about a Democrat getting elected to president.
Yeah.
Almost any Democrat, but Bernie Sanders, and even with Bernie Sanders, even if there was a progressive Democrat as soon as there's a Democrat, and I saw this with Obama, as soon as Obama was in office, everybody was just like, all right, everything's going to be okay. So let's just go back to what we were doing. Like, he's got it. He's taking care of it. He's, Paris Accord, all right. So that was 8 years of basic kind of just, he did a few things. I'm going to give him credit for trying on some, very minimal levels. He did try to put forward some protections, but then he also did a lot of damage too. He also expanded fracking, expanded oil leases, expanded, the whole thing about America being energy independent. So it was a lot of lip service, and it was a lot of mixed messages. And
and the lip service, the lip service thing. You mentioned the climate emergency declarations in England and America. We actually had the same kind of thing. It was called a climate consensus or climate agreement in the Norwegian Parliament. We had that in 1990, in 1998, in 2000 something, and in 2015, right? And every time they reach a climate agreement for the Parliament, it's like everybody is like, hallelujah, and nobody is looking up, how did it go last time? Did we keep any promises from the last agreement? Nobody. Right. Just me and a buddy, nobody listens to us. And it's like, it's going to be good now because we have the 4th climate agreement in Parliament. It's all lip service. It's all lip service. And actually, I was in Bergen, the town I was born in. In 1990, there was an international climate meeting in Bergen. I ran up to the Rio 92 meeting.
Yeah.
And all the cool young kids, climate kids, we were up there with banners that said blah, 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 blah. So we were protesting about the lip service, and they just talk. Already in 1990, that's like almost 30 years ago now. So it's always been the issue that they come up, they take their jet planes to somewhere in the world, and they talk for 5 days. Then they take the plane home again, and it's all just hot air and words, and they never do anything when they get back to the office.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm hoping that the movements that are going now, are going to, it looks like they're going to stay more consistent, as far as, but who knows how long, as with any movement, you get a swell, you get a, kind of a momentum, and then who knows how long that's sustainable, right?
But you can almost see already some signs of rot from the inside, even in Extinction Rebellion, because you have, and I'm not just talking about me now, but other people as well, who are sort of climate geeks, climate experts, or radicals or whatever.
What do you consider yourself, a climate expert or a climate geek?
I'll just finish this thought first, and then I can get back to that. So the thing is that if somebody is coming on an XR group on Facebook and criticizing the IPCC, then there are some admins who will immediately tell you that don't criticize the IPCC. The IPCC are our friends, because they believe that they are our friends, like most people believe. But the point is that these guys have social power, like in any large movement or leftist movement or whatever, from Russia till today. You have the organizers who are good with people and good with getting support from many people. But these guys in XR are not into physics or biology or climatology. They're just sort of like a politician. They are focusing on what they can get people to agree on, right? Or what is a good thing to say to mobilize a lot of people,
Right.
So instead of looking into how fraudulent the IPCC is, or how many decades ago we passed the tipping point for the climate, which I'm into, but which is not very optimistic or mobilizing, they are sort of shutting out people and even kicking them out and deleting their posts if they criticize the IPCC. So.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like, we live in times, very fractious times, where, as soon as anything gets any momentum, the criticism is just deafening, right? And then there's, I feel like it's very, very difficult to have any kind of movement these days. Yeah. So on some level, I feel like I want to just support what XR is doing, period. And I understand that there's, probably factions inside XR, and there's people, different viewpoints, and they're, and then people are upset if, Greta is speaking to Congress or the Parliament, right? They're like, oh, how could this be happening? And, this is clearly is some kind of, there's some kind of insider stuff going, or there's some conspiracy, or there's somebody behind this.
How was this microphone made? What minerals did you have to mine to make a microphone?
Yeah, exactly. How'd you get there? How did she? Yeah. And there was a good Jonathan Pye video. If you just watch the Jonathan Pye video, sorry, he talks about being, I'm a hypocrite, but everybody's locked into the system, and some people are trying to do something about it, and other people are just trying to tell you to be quiet and calling you a hypocrite for trying to do something about it. And it's a great point. And so XR is modeling itself slightly on the civil rights movement in the U.S. during the 60s, 50s and 60s, which was really successful on many levels. Obviously that was, in some ways it didn't go far enough, but I mean, there was a lot gained in that movement. And there was a time when Martin Luther King was in the White House all the time, having meetings with, the president or whoever, and had the audience of the most powerful people, arguably on the planet. And who knows, maybe at the time, I wasn't alive at the time. I was born in 67, but I'm sure people were like, oh, look at this sellout, look at this traitor, look at this guy, he's talking to the president. Of course, we're not going to get what we want. I'm sure there was all that stuff going on, but at the same time, there was enough of a critical mass, I guess. There was so much momentum that it kind of overflowed all of that, insider stuff that was going on.
It was
to create some actual change. And
it was a very, very important movement, and everything they accomplished is very, very good. But the problem with that model, or that allegory for XR, or even with the war mobilization against Germany, the problem with both of those models for societal change is that even Adolf Hitler isn't a bigger threat as human beings and civilization. This coming collapse is going to be so much more devastating than even the worst dictator or dictators we've had. And if you look at America and the civil rights struggle, and later the LGBT thing, those are very easy goals to accomplish. You just push for like 4 decades, and then it's accepted to be black or gay or whatever, right? It's not the same kind of size of problem.
True. Yeah, I mean, it's, I think it's an easy case to lay out that, like, people shouldn't be treated differently than other people.
Yeah, it's worse. Very easy. Yeah.
But the case for climate change is like, well, we're all guilty.
Yeah.
And we all have to massively change not just our lives, but the way we think about living
on
a very fundamental level.
Yeah.
And it's almost a psychological argument as much as it is a political argument, and
kind of moral.
It's not just arrangements of the living situation.
No.
It's arrangements of
It's a moral thing too, because every parent ever has wanted to make the life better for their kids, So it's always been in our moral backbone that we have to improve this and get more stuff and more food and bigger house for our kids. So
right. But then you can turn that argument around and say that, well, if you're really concerned about your kids, then you would be concerned about the future of the planet, right? So if you're on some level, we've even lost that that instinct, because it's just very short term. We're thinking in terms of 50 years ago or 60 years ago, what it meant to like have a better life, or you want your kids to go to college, or you want your kids to have more than you have, or go farther than you've gone. But at this point, we understand that all of that doesn't, all of that is an illusion, compared to living in a sustainable manner. And I think more people understand that than are willing to let on, right? People understand, okay, the gig is up. This is the end of capitalism. This is the end of that, that paradigm of thought, this whole, and there's plenty of people still stuck in it, but I'm just, for those who, I think I think it goes beyond climate geeks and climate, people. I think there's a lot of.
Yeah, you asked me a question how I self-identify.
Yeah.
Well, my pronouns are he and him. But as climate is concerned, I would just say I would use the words abrupt climate change, of course, and I kind of like the word geek because it, for the in crowd who are geeks, it means that you have some skills within that field.
Sure.
And for the outsiders, it's like, oh, that is this weird sort of subculture thing.
Right.
So
yeah. I mean, I'm certainly I wouldn't call myself a climate expert because I didn't go to school.
No.
I didn't take ecology classes or biology classes or whatever conservatory classes. So I'm not. I don't have any. I don't have any school training. But I'm a geek in that. I'm super interested in this, and I kind of, I obsess about, climate news and what it means. And
I think you're the only guy or the only person on the planet who's making daily shows on climate. That's something.
What about Hambone? Isn't he? I thought he was doing daily shows. Or used to. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. He's more like, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe that's the point. I'm just thinking that you are more sort of editorial in your things, and he's more reading up something.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. I guess I am the only one. I don't know if Robert Fanny is still doing.
Yeah, but he's like once a month or once every 2 months or something.
So I see. He slowed down.
Yeah.
At one point, he was doing a lot of videos.
So
it's hard to sustain. it's a lot of work.
I'm kind of skeptical to doing that kind of deal with the audience, because that means that you wake up every day and you feel you have to do this on that exact day, So,
right.
But I'm very impressed that you're able to keep it up. So, yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, I don't know. How often do you generally publish something?
I'm actually really a novelist, so I'm a writer. So that's my main project these days. And then my YouTube channel is part of my research and part of my, getting to know the other people and getting to know the scene, right? So it's not like. It has sort of been my main project outward that people can actually see. But it's more like an artistic thing for me. That I do it when I feel I have something that needs to come out, or I feel I have some content that is good enough to present. And I think it's like 5 years ago since I stopped trying to convince people who didn't think we had a problem. So that's sort of not my thing. And I also don't believe in the election system. That's not something I see as a solution for the problem. So.
I mean, there's I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think a lot of people are disillusioned, with the political process. Even though right now it seems to be we're in a, at the same time that there seems to be this creeping fascism, there also seems to be this awakening, left, progressive, climate aware awakening among a lot of people. So, we're in a very, I think we're in a heady time. We're in a time where...
Yes, it could be, but how climate aware is it really? Is it just even more lip service? Is it just a green badge on your jacket to attract the voters, and then they are voted in, and it's nothing, nada? That's right. What I fear it's going to be. So.
Well, that's a huge fear of mine too. That's why, there's a big push. And I think where I get the impetus to do a daily video is because I follow progressive news channels in the U.S. There's quite a few of them. There at least 10 that I can think of right off the top of my head. But they're all doing really pretty good work as far as really trying to dissect what's really happening in the political field. And trying to vet all the candidates. So. Pretty much all of them say, like, all the candidates are trash except for Bernie Sanders. Like, you could pretty much trash all of them. Tulsi Gabbard actually gets, she seems to be a little higher on the scale of acceptability. But, as far as authenticity goes, or broadness of platform and with that, all of that said, the mainstream, the powers that be absolutely hate Bernie Sanders. They hate him with a passion, and you can see it on all of the TV and all of the mainstream broadcasts. They call him washed up, an old man. Yeah. He should go home. He should give his voters to Elizabeth Warren. He should, so the chances that he gets, I guess, knocked out of the primaries again are probably pretty high. I think a lot of people don't have a lot of high hopes.
But then there's a problem of what if you get what you want, and that's right. Really giving me the creeps, because if you and I and whoever actually gets the most green progressive president that is on the offer, what happens then? And I've been online with Christine Lund, from the Natural Progressive channel, and both she and I share the same fear that if they actually are voted in and I get to go ahead with the Green New Deal, it will destroy the planet completely. Because if you're going to build high-speed rail and windmill parks and all kinds of green tech and solar, you have to sort of mine the other rest of the planet. Mine the rest of Africa and China and Greenland to get the rare earth minerals and everything, and there's nobody in the Green New Deal or the Democrat Party who's looked into when the tipping points were for the climate. If it's even possible to change it now. So let's say that I'm right and the scientists I listen to are right about the climate, that we actually stepped over a point of no return some decades ago, last century, then a Green New Deal can only make things worse, because if this society, if this civilization is going to collapse in the near future, at least the bears and the black bears and the salmon and the moose and the bison and the tigers will have another chance to to expand their reign. You know, if when cities collapse and fields are not farmed anymore and everything, right? So
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that gets into. I agree with you that there are things about the Green New Deal or a Green New Deal or Bernie Sanders' plan that are probably in the long run not good for the planet.
Which was the intention, I would guess. The intention is to be good for the planet, isn't it?
Yeah, right? and that actually is what I see that's positive about it, is that it's so far-reaching that, you know, at least it would go a long way to communicating the problem to people. And I think that, you know, you'd have to, you know, a couple of years into the Green New Deal, you know, saner voices would have to go, look, you know, this we can't do. Electric cars we can't do. This we can't do. We've got to do this, right? You know, so once you get that ball rolling and you get a Bernie Sanders in office, then you get the scientists that know, you know, the real deal, what's going on, like, you know, really what the problem is and how to counter it. You know, you could get, you know, a better handle on, okay, we thought it was this, but no, it's actually this, and we got to, you know, go this way. It's tough because climate science is like probably more complicated than most people can handle, you know, and I know that seems completely, you know, I'm sorry if that seems elitist of me, but it's just the common person is just like, we gotta what? We gotta stop eating hamburgers.
But
like,
it can be
literally people are stuck there, you know.
It can be a good thing that is complicated because you've seen your president Donald saying no to the Paris Accords, which is a really, really bad deal, and. Who knows? Maybe he will end the IPCC. Maybe he will kick the IPCC's butt and dissolve it, which would be a good thing too. But he wouldn't know why it was good, you know. So
right. Well, and here's another interesting thing. People are more aware about the climate and more angry about the climate than I've ever seen. Because Trump is in office, right? Because he's basically taken the mask off of
establishment,
disaster capitalism, and, you know, ecocide, and just, you know, he's just an all-out onslaught on the environment and on the planet in general. And he's, you know, he's so bad that in a way it wakes people up. He makes people angry, and he makes people go like, well, God damn it, we got to do something about this, right? And again, you get a Democrat in office who's got all the right policies, and everybody goes, all right, you know, somebody's taking care of it. Let's, you know, I'm just going to plan my weekend now, you know, I'm going to plan my trip to Italy now. So,
I'm going to take my plane trip around the world 20 times because now it's fixed.
My safari to Africa. I'm going to, you know, whatever. I'm going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. That's what I'm doing. You know, and I guess, you know, that's the thing is I'm hoping for a push from the progressive left, you know, enough of a push of awareness so that people can actually, you know, if enough people can take on board just the basic idea that we're in a bad spot, you know, then you can get the climate geeks kind of in there to say like, okay, you guys know, now you know we're in a bad spot. Now here's how bad the spot really is.
And then we can spend the rest of our lives in prison or in a labor camp in Siberia,
or something. Or I mean, the pushback already against even AOC or Bernie Sanders or any of the Green New Deal, the pushback already is like pretty severe, you know. I mean,
and I heard that Bernie Sanders had a heart attack. So
yeah, interestingly though, I think he's doing okay. You know, from what I can see, he's doing okay.
Yeah.
And on some weird level, I think it might actually help him a little bit. I think people, you know, will feel bad a little bit. You know what I mean? It's kind of like he's got a little underdog thing going now, right? He had a heart attack.
As long as he doesn't die before he takes office. As long as he doesn't die before he takes office.
As long as he doesn't die before he takes office. But I mean, I think he's in really, you know, it's funny because he's always been this image of like really good health for an elderly person. You know, there's that image of him running for the train, and he's like playing basketball, and he's like, he's been the guy that's like in good shape, kind of, for a 78-year-old. But
is he that old? Okay,
he's 78. Okay. Yeah. So by the time he took office, he would be close to 80 or 80.
So what do you think? Do you think maybe that's what's wrong with the democracy? That you have to be like 65 plus in order to enter the game?
Well, the actual age is 35, so you can be 35 plus.
Yeah, but in reality,
But as in like accepted, or to have the seniority to run for president, I guess. I mean, yeah, it could be. I mean, Obama was pretty young. I think he was like 40 or 41 when he took office. He was fairly young.
Okay.
I think he was the youngest president.
But he was a disaster for the planet, though.
He was. and he was a disaster in a lot of ways that people don't really understand, and that's, unfortunate. And I think that actually goes to the fact that most people are not politically savvy or aware enough to actually be in a democracy, because when you have somebody that's literally a puppet of the corporate state and you think that person is the greatest person since sliced bread,
I don't know.
And you can't question them because they're scandal free and they're lovely family, which they all were. He was.
And he was
scandal free, intelligent guy,
and he was a colored person, so you couldn't criticize him for fear of being a racist.
Well, yeah. I mean, then you can't. It comes off a little differently if you're trying to say, look, maybe he wasn't, the greatest president. Sometimes people think that's some kind of like right wing smear.
Yeah.
Plenty of people on the left that understand that Obama was not a great president, but I don't know, that it's mayhem and confusion, and I don't, I'm hoping that XR can continue. Here's what's actually impressive to me is that I've been seeing a lot of BBC clips. And, so on the mainstream news, they are talking about Extinction Rebellion. They're having people come on in panels. They're talking about the problem as if it exists. And they're actually talking about, the idea of people not flying anymore or not driving, And so it gets that kind of play kind of in the U.S., like only as a slam, only on Fox News when they say these crazy lunatics. But they would never have somebody from Extinction Rebellion on, or Chris Hedges had somebody on, but that's not mainstream news. But the mainstream media, NBC or ABC, wouldn't necessarily have, people, on Greta Thunberg or anybody on of any import. They just wouldn't be discussing it as, as much as they are saying on the BBC. And I find that a little almost wild, like
it is actually reason to be a bit skeptical, because why are they invited into the studio to talk with the other politicians and stuff. And I remember back when I was a teenager and I was drawn into the climate movement. That was because it actually got some exposure in Norwegian media, radio and TV. There was actually coverage of it, and then suddenly that coverage just stopped almost the same year as the IPCC came into the room, and some people talk about that issue sort of being pushed out or something. So I think it's reason to be skeptical of the media all the time. When we had the Paris Agreement, it was sold as you said, the best thing since sliced bread. It was sold in the media as, we finally solved climate change, So back to your jet plane holidays in Southeast Asia. It's a big point and an important point that you make. We can't really have a functioning democracy if what's inside people's head is just poo-poo. If they're fed by tabloid, half-baked media making news the cheapest it's possible to make news without any research or anything, then people don't even know what was discussed in Paris. It's only sold as a big happy occasion like Christmas Eve or something.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why I think it's really important, all the channels, the climate channels and the progressive news channels that are on YouTube, like I think they're really making some kind of impact, because people not everybody is glued to the mainstream media. People are looking for alternative news sources. People are looking for real information. And I think it has a big impact, as long as we can continue to not be censored or not be squashed. Is it going to make enough of an impact to educate people to the point where we can have a functioning democracy?
I think I think you have the answer to that already, because as you were talking about the other day on your channel, your numbers are sort of frozen, and my channel numbers are sort of frozen. Have been so for 5 months. It's like 1915 one day, and 1910 the other day, and then back to 1915 by the end of the week. It's like there's no movement at all. It's just stuck in some swamp, and that's because they changed the algorithms at YouTube. And
they just did that recently.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if people are thrown out without actually unsubbing, but it's like all their PR or all their promotion of videos is going to the big guys, to the CNNs and the CBSs. And
and that's been documented on some other channels, right? They've shown the numbers between before the algorithm was changed, after the algorithm was changed, and all the viewers they're trying to get everybody to watch CNN and MSNBC and all that.
And I actually got a big boost by the algorithms like 2 years ago, because before that there was no help at all, and then all of a sudden they changed something somewhere, and everybody was treated the same or something, and then my videos shut up and got big viewership, and a lot of people subscribed to my channel, and then they changed it back, and it's almost like I'm unpopular. And I guess they want people to feel that they're just making crap content, or they're not popular, but that's not true.
Yeah, and but it can really get in your head if you didn't understand. That's what's happening. You could start feeling like, am I doing something wrong? Should I self-censor? Should I
should I shave?
And that's interesting too, because I think sometimes they changed. A few months ago, they did something with the algorithm, and I think they were testing it out or something. And for a moment, on another progressive channel I watched, like the guy got 20,000 viewers in a few weeks, and he had been stuck at like 25,000, and all of a sudden he was at 50, like in a couple of weeks, and he was like, "What happened there?" And in that same few weeks, I also got like, I don't know, a couple hundred subscribers. I got a bunch of subscribers in like 2 weeks, and I was like, all right, everything is picking up. But then like the next week they squashed the algorithm again, and he went, he stayed, he got squashed again, I got squashed again. From what I can see, everybody else is getting squashed again. So whatever they're doing, I think sometimes they make a mistake and go like, oh, it's not, well, we're going to launch this thing and it doesn't quite work right. And it ends up benefiting people, and they're like, "Oops, all right, you gotta, rein that in or whatever." But
I think they are preparing for the next decade when the digital media will be more important than TV and newspapers. So they want to control it, and they want to be able to, as people have already written about, Google and Facebook are actually able to influence the last-minute voters in an election.
Oh yeah.
Just by sending a little, they can send an alert. Remember to go and vote, and then just send it to let's say the conservatives or just the radicals or the liberals, and that will determine the outcome of an election. Just a selectively sent alert to go and vote.
Right. Well, and then the other thing too is that during the 2016 election here, it was, they really saw the power of social media and alternative media, and people were actually more educated than I've ever seen. It was an open discussion all over, everywhere. It's Facebook, Twitter. People were talking politics, in such a great way. And so at the end of all that, Trump was elected and people were really upset. And then you had Russiagate, which made
3 years. Yeah.
Russiagate blamed, all this alternative, all this thought, that people were waking up to. They blamed it all on the Russians, right? So people weren't really thinking these thoughts, and they weren't really and you had that during the election cycle where if people started to become aware of, who Hillary Clinton was, and started to become aware of who Bernie Sanders was and who Donald Trump was. And so there was all this, if you said something bad about Hillary Clinton, oh, that's a right-wing talking point. Or if you said something, whatever about Donald Trump, I don't know. It was just what would be the word? I guess it would be there was already like intellectual warfare going on, or like info wars, if you will. Information war was already happening during that time, but I actually saw it as a very healthy thing. It was this moment where like, oh, all this communication and all this information and this whole internet thing was like producing knowledge and awareness. But having discourse and debate.
The problem is kind of that Donald Trump was playing the liberal media like a fiddle, and he was picking provocative things to say, and then he got the left media to amplify it. So he was sort of outsmarting everyone the way I've seen it.
On top of the fact that he got free media from the major, he got something like $6 billion worth of free media. Yeah,
just by being a clown. Yeah,
just for being just for being so they were constantly covering Trump. They barely covered, if didn't cover, Bernie Sanders, and so Hillary and Trump got all the media coverage. Yeah, but Trump actually got more, and he won. So that's how powerful that media coverage is.
Yeah, and I think I follow a guy sort of middle of this three political guy called Tim Pool or Tim Cast. And he's making he's making a big point now that the Democrats are only talking about impeaching Trump. After going on the Russia thing for 3 years, now they're not even promoting their own policies. It's only going to throw Trump out through impeachment, and it's not really polling very well because voters don't really want him to be thrown out. They want him to be voted out, not thrown out. So.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting times, and I agree. Yeah, that this whole thing is actually really good at overshadowing the fact that there's Extinction Rebellion and climate strikers out there. It's overshadowing like, hey, there's this emergency, and everybody they're making it. Well, the emergency is we got to get Trump out of office. And like, you could say, well, if you only have a year to vote him out. You could just vote him out, or you could spend a year trying to impeach him, and give him more power, and give him more media coverage, and allow him to win the election again. You could do that, So
you could talk about your own fantastic policies instead of just kicking the other candidate. I think that's a more democratic thing to do. So.
Right. Well, so Jimmy Dore, if you know who Jimmy Dore is. Always said he's a progressive guy. He's real good, but he always says that the Democrats would rather Trump win than a progressive Democrat. So the establishment Democrats really actually don't care if Trump wins or not. They just care. They just really don't want a progressive to win because it would. It would take away their power.
I've heard
it would mean more power to the people.
I've heard that line of thought, and the criticism of those again is that they only want to see the world burn. If they don't get a very, very radical candidate, they just want everything to collapse, and then they can start their revolution after or something. I don't know.
Right. And I think that's the lead. I think that's already been proven to be not true, right? So we got the most. We had a centrist Democrat, run against we had the two most terrible people ever run against each other.
Yeah.
And, we could have had somebody with some form of authenticity or, some kind of policies that could help people. And they just absolutely don't want that discussion to take place. But
it's like
anyways, first time I got to wrap this up. This has been a really quick hour that we talked.
Yeah.
And I apologize. We could talk about so many more things, but I really have to go.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you coming on. Let's do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, you should come on Going South one of these days, and we can see what's happening with the rebellion for the rest of the autumn, and then maybe check back.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, man, for the discussion. I appreciate you, and we'll talk to you real soon.
See you back.
If people want to follow along, again, as Sam mentioned, the site is ecologicalsurvival.org. If you click on the hamburger menu, you will find the document that Sam mentioned, Ecological Survival and Revolutionary Change. And you might want to open that up. I'll be referring to some diagrams which are useful in explaining these, rather complicated issues. So, this document has two parts. Part A about the crisis and the response, and Part 2 is about how we can actually get things done, actually resolve this crisis through revolutionary change. So the first part of this first section is on the ecological crisis itself. And if you are following along, go to Figure 1, titled The Ecological Crisis, and you'll see my interpretation of what is happening. And what you'll see there is that the cause of all this is economic overexpansion. The capitalist global economy expanded rapidly, of course, especially in the 20th century and since 1950. And right around that time, 1950, what happened was ecological overshoot. And by that I mean the violation of multiple environmental limits occurred right around that time, especially with greenhouse gases, where CO2 went above its long-term maximum of 300 ppm for the first time in a long, long time. So we have an ecological crisis stemming from ecological overshoot, again, driven by capitalism's economic overexpansion. And I think it's very important to divide that crisis into two segments so we can deal with it conceptually. So I call the first part the GHG crisis, the greenhouse gas crisis. This is what's normally known as climate change. As I'll explain, I reject that. So there's two parts to this crisis. One, again, the GHG or greenhouse gas crisis, and then a number of non-greenhouse gas impacts, such as habitat destruction, overexploitation of resources, non-greenhouse gas pollution wastes, etc. Now, focusing on the greenhouse gas crisis, which is critical because that's where the tipping points and points of no return are, and also this is the area that's been so wildly misrepresented, especially by the IPCC and its followers. So, my take on the greenhouse gas crisis is that there are two sets of effects, a set of warming effects and a chemical effect. The warming effects are called global warming, and global warming is basically the warming of the Earth's surface due to excess greenhouse gases. And that causes ocean warming, and that in turn causes ocean deoxygenation. And global warming also has an immediate impact on climate change. About 7% of the warming goes into the atmosphere rather than the ocean, so there is an immediate effect on climate change. But most of climate change comes, in fact, from ocean warming. 93% roughly of the heat from excess greenhouse gases goes into the ocean, and that in turn warms the climate. So just to make sure you understand this point, climate change is a real problem, no doubt, but it's the end point of all this. It is one of the warming effects of global warming, okay? So I distinguish very strongly between global warming, the overall warming effects, and climate change, which is one of the effects or results of global warming. And then the other major branch here, the other major effect of these unsafe levels of greenhouse gases is the chemical effect of ocean acidification, which is caused by excess CO2 alone. Okay? So to summarize, we have economic overexpansion because capitalism is an inherently expansionary economy. That caused ecological overshoot right around 1950. That is the ecological crisis, which consists of two components, the greenhouse gas crisis and various non-GHG impacts. So as I go along, I'll be referring to the GHG crisis, and now you know what that is. Yeah. And by the way, climate change has sort of been the, been the primary, people have paid most attention to climate change, I should say, because the atmosphere has a very low mass relative to the ocean. So as the planet heats from global warming, we first notice the effects in the atmosphere, the climate. But, of course, there's also major changes happening in the ocean. So we could be calling this an ocean crisis rather than a climate crisis. So you can see that there's confusion here, and I prefer my terminology, as I just explained. Now, let's move on to the second part of this, and again, if you're following along, we're now going to section 2 of this rather lengthy document, and this discusses what I call the rational response. Now, I've been of two minds, whether to call it a rational response or the rational response, but this is so compelling to me that I've put the word "the" in there. I think it is the way to go. Okay, and I'm looking here at figure 2, again, if you're looking at the website. And what I have there is a representation of what I think should be done about this crisis at the highest level. And it's a little matrix with 4 parts. At the top is the greenhouse gas crisis. At the bottom are the non-greenhouse gas impacts. And on the left is the present damage, and on the right is past damage. And I won't get into details, but basically, for both the greenhouse gas crisis and the non-greenhouse gas impacts, to reduce our present damage, we have to reduce consumption, we have to reduce population, especially in the rich world, and we have to increase efficiencies, okay? And this can be done, of course, by modifying our economies. So this is stuff that we can actually impact by our day-to-day behavior, our social organization, our economic system, etc. Unfortunately, we also have past damage to deal with. Changing our economic system will do nothing to draw greenhouse gases out of the air, for example. Okay, so we have to deal with that as a discrete part of the solution. And I think for the greenhouse gas crisis, there are 2 critical measures. One is solar radiation management, which we'll discuss further later on. And the other one is greenhouse gas removals. Okay? And for the non-GHG impacts, there is a set of measures which I won't go into. They're all in the document. I call that ecological restoration. So to summarize that, again, this crisis consists of those 2 aspects, greenhouse gas, non-greenhouse gas, and there are present and past damages. And all those have to be discretely dealt with. And I think once we conceptualize the response, the rational response in that way, those 4 categories, then we can actually, rationally approach this systematically. I don't see much of that happening today. People are sort of jumping at this, efficiency and that, and it is really rather silly. So, that was pretty basic stuff. Now I come to something that is far more contentious. Part 3 of this first section is called blocking the rational response. So, the rational response I just mentioned has, of course, not been implemented. This is obvious. And for that reason, we have an existential crisis. And the answer, and the question is, why was it not implemented? We are Homo sapiens. We are a supposedly wise and rational species. But of course, as pretty well everyone now knows, we've done nothing effectively to solve this crisis. Why is that so? Well, let's say it out loud. I think what a lot of us know in the back of our minds. But the rational response would threaten 3 things: capitalism, economic growth, and rich country lifestyles. So, Stan, that's me and thee. We've lived well, and we've lived well in an unsustainable society. So, we benefit. So the rational response goes against the grain both of the system and its ruling class, and us as individuals who benefit from that. So the next question is, how is this non-solution sold to us? Why have we, and a lot of us are extremely concerned and knowledgeable, but we've been persuaded somehow not to act on this crisis? How the hell did this happen? Well, I think there's 3 parts. Number 1, the crisis has been distorted, okay, from, as I explained, from overshoot, the real crisis, to climate change, which, again, as explained, is simply one facet of global warming. So we have this distortion and reduction of the crisis, and then we have an organization called the IPCC and a lot of related organizations and people authoritatively acknowledging that this is indeed the problem, this reduced crisis. And then having sort of trapped us into believing that, oh yes, these people recognize what's going on, they have basically diverted us for any solutions that threaten this system, its growth, or our lifestyles. Okay? So again, 3 steps: distort and reduce the crisis, authoritatively acknowledge this distorted version, and then deny any threatening solutions. Okay? And that means everything but really efficiencies. And how was this done? As stated, the key instrument is this sacred cow we call the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. And as I explain in some detail in this document, in the 3rd section, and I quote a very good historian named Weert on this, the IPCC was not formed, as most people think, to solve this crisis, the so-called climate crisis, what I call the GHG crisis. In 1988, when the IPCC was formed, there were independent meetings happening here in Toronto, Canada, as well as in Austria, by independent scientists, and they were worried sick, and they were trying to get some real radical action going. And the IPCC was formed right at that time, and control of this issue was transferred from those courageous and concerned scientists to the bureaucrats, economists, negotiators, politicians, etc., who for the past 30 years have assured that nothing of any significance happened. So basically, based on its formation, the IPCC took control of this issue from those worried scientists and placed it in the hands of people who would do nothing. So, if I, and this author, his name is Weert, I forget his first name, if this is correct, then the IPCC is not what we think it is. It is something quite different. By the way, I think the most egregious thing that the IPCC has done is to marginalize solar radiation management. Here we go. Around 1950, capitalism's relentless economic expansion resulted in ecological overshoot. This triggered an ecological crisis that has 2 components: the GHG crisis and various non-GHG impacts. The rational response to this calamity includes SRM, solar radiation management, and a range of measures for minimizing our current damage and repairing the damage we've already done. This response was blocked because it would threaten capitalism, growth, and rich world lifestyles. The IPCC was likely established in 1988 to spearhead this solutions denial. Its approach is to reduce ecological overshoot to quote-unquote climate change, attract the concern by acknowledging this diminished crisis and opposing the deniers, and then reject any threatening measures. So now, having done the Jeremiad, here's what's wrong. Part B is about ecological survival. In other words, what I see as the potential solution. Okay. And the first section here is called From Capitalism to a Sustainable Economy. But I think one of the key requirements for moving to a sustainable economic system beyond capitalism should be rather obvious, but is always neglected, is we need a new economic theory. Okay, standard economics is tied to this growth, this extraordinary growth of capitalism. It can't serve. Ecological economics, the only real alternative, has a disastrous conceptual foundation, which I describe in this document. Neither of those serves the purpose. A new economic theory is required, and really I spent much of the last 20, 25 years developing that theory. And that is called The Economics of Needs and Limits, as Sam mentioned. I have a book on that and other documents that you'll all find on this website. Okay? And one of the key things about this economic theory or framework is that it's based explicitly on an ethical principle, which standard economics, of course, is not. And I'd like to read that out, okay, see if people agree. Here's the ethical principle for the economics of needs and limits. All human beings, present and future, are of high and equal worth. Now, from that ethical stance, I developed a bunch of concepts, analytical tools, etc., in an attempt to produce an economic theory that could drive the transition to a sustainable economy and then help guide that economy in the future. Okay, so in a very brief nutshell, that is that section. Then I come to section 2 in part B, and it is titled The Necessity of Revolutionary Change. And of course, I understand full well that revolutionary change is something, abhorrent to a lot of people. It's extremely upsetting, personally and socially, so this must be justified. So I wrote a whole section on that. And I cite 5 reasons. They're in the summary to this section, and I'd like to read them out. They're all very important, okay? So here is Frank's 5 reasons why we need revolutionary change to survive this crisis. Number 1, humankind's response to the ecological crisis must be proportionate to the problem. Politically, this implies the replacement of the current social leadership, the capitalist ruling class, with a sustainable group. 2, our response must be effective well before tipping points and points of no return are reached. This means that strategies based on modified popular perspectives or slow-forming mass movements are untenable. So something more extreme is required than what we're currently seeing. Number 3, mainstream sources correctly claim that reaching net zero emissions will require transformative social change. It is therefore likely that the vastly more ambitious safe concentration approach will require a revolutionary shift. I didn't emphasize it, but my goal for the greenhouse gas crisis is to reduce concentrations to their safe levels. Reason number 4 for revolutionary change is that political analysis firmly establishes that capitalist societies are ruled not by their people or governments, but by dominant groups that derive their power from economic ownership and control. Pressuring governments for fundamental change is therefore pointless and self-defeating. And 5, a much larger issue, revolutionary change is the essential first step in species redirection humankind's ecological shift from an expansionary to a contractionary trajectory. And in my document, Sam, you may have noticed I cited Adam Frank's book, Light of the Stars. Frank is an astrophysicist at the University of Rochester.
I've interviewed him about that book. You can find my interview with Adam Frank on here as well, where he talks about that a whole lot. Anyway.
Yeah, anyway, that is the issue I'm addressing in step 5 there, that we could be potentially, one of many species in the cosmos that has faced this overshoot issue. And if that's true, which is what Adam Frank says, then this is now, right now as we speak, our chance, our responsibility to meet that challenge. Can we live within the constraints of our planet? And of course, that is an open question right now. What this derives from is my own study of revolutionary history. And what I see in the revolutions of the past is you need two elements to drive revolutionary change. Number one is you need visceral anger, okay? Not just intellectual objections or even ethical concerns. You need visceral anger. In the past, this was the working class, which was brutalized by early industrial conditions. And today, it is likely the young and their concerned parents who are most potentially subject to visceral anger and could drive revolutionary change. And the second basic requirement is a coercive social force, okay, to replace the current social leadership. If we're going to talk about a revolutionary change, we can't play around, okay? We've got to take this seriously and say, okay, if this is going to happen, who or what can do it? And you have to identify a force in society that can, in fact, coercively replace the ruling class. And yes, Sam, I'm afraid that violence may be required in that. So my proposed strategy here is that the young, and I've recently realized perhaps their concerned parents as well, supply the anger, and the military supplies the coercive force. Now, I realize people may be saying, what did he just say, the military? Yeah, as an ex-progressive, I rejected military action, or I saw the military in a negative light for many decades of my life. But as this crisis has reached the point we're now at, I've come to realize that I've had to drop that and look at the military objectively. And when I do that, I see the only force capable of shifting things in the time required. In late 2018, Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg stood before a Stockholm audience and delivered a forceful presentation. And by the way, it was a very good one. The 15-year-old expressed amazement that, despite widespread talk of an existential crisis, no one is acting as if a crisis actually exists. She also insisted that today's rules won't save the world, so these rules must be changed. Her activist approach, School Strike for Climate, is now being copied by students around the world. Although this youth movement is an exciting and necessary development, it is deeply marred by the fact that Thunberg and her followers have embraced the standard GHG story, the standard greenhouse gas story. For them, the problem is emissions, the solution is renewable energy, and the agents of change are politicians and governments. It is therefore possible that, although millions of fired-up students will soon hit the streets, their horrific futures will remain unchanged because of the lies and distortions they have absorbed. To avert this tragic outcome, the young must quickly repudiate the falsehoods and decisively forge an independent path. Moving on with this, the first lesson they must learn is that, quote-unquote, changing the rules means far more than eliminating fossil fuels. It means replacing the current social leadership and moving from capitalism to a sustainable economy. But the political power to create a new and sustainable social order. Ecological survival demands revolutionary change, whether we like it or not. Another critical lesson for the young is that the falsehoods go much deeper than they realize. The IPCC is not just a conservative organization that is hamstrung by a clumsy review process. It is instead a deliberate stratagem by social leaders to absorb concerns and deny threatening solutions. The primary reason that SRM is dismissed, solar radiation management, is dismissed is not that it is risky, but that its large-scale adoption might expose capitalism's role in ecological overshoot, thereby killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. In her presentation, Thunberg rhetorically asked, "Are we evil?" She answered with an emphatic no, explaining that most people don't understand the crisis and the drastic changes required. But numerous people, particularly social leaders and their well-informed supporters, have understood all this for decades. They nevertheless remain fervent supporters of a life-destroying economic system because they have made an obscene ethical decision. Our present is worth more than your future. This means that, to a disturbing degree, the older are evil. Youth strategies that ignore this grim reality are bound to fail. And my last paragraph here, and I'll stop after that, my final point is this. Any approach that could succeed in salvaging the biosphere will necessarily be unorthodox and thus appear strange and even shocking. The ecological crisis is now so far advanced that only massive and unfamiliar actions will pull us back from the brink. My proposal for revolutionary change must be assessed in this terrifying context. As a corollary, any approach that feels comfortably familiar cannot possibly work. Bold government policies and clean energy initiatives can thus be dismissed out of hand. Far from being enlightened solutions, such measures reflect the cynical manipulations of a social force that must now be replaced by a sustainable alternative. This is the first stage of a revolution to supplant what is currently an ecocidal civilian leadership with a sustainable civilian leadership through a limited period of military rule necessitated by the ecological crisis. So I don't see long-term military rule, okay? And then how do you do that? Well, I think a massive movement, but not a massive movement of the young, of their concerned parents, of progressives, perhaps like yourself, who have abandoned that non-revolutionary movement and have become radicalized. And all those forces have to tell the military in articles, videos, direct contacts, their parents, if they're children of these people, that your ultimate responsibility is to the people. Your duty, your professional duty is to safeguard the people. And currently, you're not doing that. You're allowing the people to be destroyed by this crisis, and you're allowing the country, in your case, the United States, to be invaded by foreigners. And that is sea level rise and everything else. So the military currently is not protecting either the populace or the national territory. In other words, they are not doing their professional duty. And I think what the movement, this, again, youth parental movement, has to do is to remind the military of their fundamental duty. Of course, they're an extraordinarily negative force in the world. I'm under no delusions about that. But again, they're the only force that can do the job, and they have a professional duty, which they know about and frequently acknowledge, to safeguard the people and the national territory. If we can forcefully point out to them that they're not doing those things, okay, that they're in fact being unprofessional and unethical, they may shift. They may not. But we now understand what we've experienced all that. We now understand more. And I think if you read my document, and again, take advantage of a quarter century of hard thinking and reading, then perhaps we can push this forward a little bit and in a roundabout way get to the Trumps and the Bolsonaros, et cetera. We're not going to do it directly, but the underpinnings of this society is the state and the ruling class. We have to start thinking in terms of the state, especially the military aspect of the state, and that there's a ruling class out there. And by the way, Sam, I got to say, one of the main things wrong with progressivism, and another reason for my departure from that movement, is that they simply will not recognize the existence of a capitalist ruling class. It is always the corporations, the elite, the oligarchy, all words that basically brush away the reality that any complex society is dominated by a ruling class. This is the capitalist era. That class is capitalist. And that is a political reality. Corporations, which progressives like to harp on, these are economic entities, okay? There is a political reality called the ruling class, and that is what we must now be focusing on. And that's one of my main complaints about Chris Hedges, is that he doesn't do that. Anyway, that's an aside. What can we do? Well, there's two things you can do. You can basically give up in various ways, or you can say, what is the best strategy given the reality of our current condition? Stop fucking whining and start strategizing. Didn't somebody say, don't mourn, organize? Isn't this what we're doing, should be doing now? Okay, don't whine, strategize, analyze, do what you can. You'll probably lose. I'll probably lose. But we'll have our dignity, we'll be human beings, and we'll die with our boots on.